strongest Deathworld species met humans, everything changed forever. The signal did not make sense. Duro read it 3 times, standing at the center display of his warship while the amber lights hummed low around him. The crew worked at their stations without speaking. That was how things were aboard a Breth vessel. No noise unless there was a reason for it. No movement unless it had a purpose. The ship itself was built the same way, dark alloy walls, narrow corridors, everything designed for function and nothing else. Comfort was something the Breth had stopped needing several thousand years ago. The signal was not a weapon charge. It was not a distress call in any known format. It was something closer to a greeting, a repeating data burst, structured, patient, broadcasting from a small station sitting near the edge of Breth expansion space like it had every right to be there. Duro pulled up the scan results. The station was not large. No visible weapon emplacements. Power readings suggested a life support system, some communications equipment, and very little else. The biological signatures inside were warm, oxygen-breathing, and completely unknown. He checked the registry. The Breth had spent 3 centuries cataloging every species in the reachable galaxy. Every one of them had a file, threat rating, physical capability, behavioral patterns under pressure. The registry was thorough because the Breth had always been thorough. They sat at the top of every threat ranking ever calculated. Their homeworld had gravity 3 times the galactic standard, temperatures that stripped lesser atmospheres bare, and predators that hunted the things that hunted everything else. Every species the Breth had ever encountered had done one of 3 things: submitted, fled, or been destroyed. The registry returned no match for the biological signature from the station. Duro ordered the ship forward. He expected the station to go dark when they came into visible range. That was what happened. Whatever was inside would see a Breth warship and respond the way everything responded, with fear, with silence, with the instinct to become very small and very still. The station did not go dark. Its lights stayed on. Its communications array stayed active. And then, while Duro was still processing this, the external airlock indicator on his sensor feed changed from green to cycling amber. Someone was coming out. He watched the figure emerge through the sensors, small, 2-limbed, upright, covered in a standard-looking environmental suit, moving slowly, not running, not erratic. The figure carried 2 objects, a sealed container and a flat data device, and walked out into open space as if stepping outside for a short walk. Duro ran a full biological scan automatically. No armor plating, no reinforced bone density, no natural venom glands, no subdermal implants, no enhanced musculature. The scan could not find a single physical adaptation that would explain why this creature was not already trying to get back inside. He ran the scan again. Same results. The figure was completely unmodified, baseline fragile in every measurable way. His scanner also confirmed that the creature was fully aware of the Breth warship, sitting 200 meters from its dock. It walked toward them anyway. The open channel crackled. A voice came through, calm, unhurried, the way someone speaks when they are not performing anything. "Hello, my name is Petra. I'm a xenobiologist and I think we may be neighbors. I brought food in case you haven't eaten." Duro's second-in-command, Tev, looked at him from across the bridge. He did not ask the question out loud. He did not need to. The channel was muted. Immediately the room filled with theories. One officer said it was a trap, a weak creature sent out to draw them close while something larger waited inside. Another said the creature's mind had broken under the fear, the way some lower species collapsed into erratic behavior when confronted with stimuli too large for them to process. A third said the greeting structure of the transmission was too composed for a malfunctioning mind. Rael, the youngest soldier on the bridge, said nothing. He watched Duro. None of the frameworks fit. The Breth understood behavior through 2 lenses only, threat or submission. This creature was displaying neither. It was standing in open space in front of a warship, holding food, waiting. Duro told Tev to hold the ship at weapons range. Then he told Rael to come with him. The walk to the shuttle bay was short. Duro noticed the sound of his own boots on the deck plates, which he had never noticed before. He told himself the creature was probably the advance unit of something larger. He told himself this was a standard contact scenario with an unknown variable. He told himself that nothing about this required any adjustment to his thinking. None of the scenarios he ran in his head ended the way Breth scenarios were supposed to end. The shuttle docked. The airlock corridor on the other side was narrow and warm, lit with a soft yellow light that felt almost like sunlight. There were plants growing along one wall in small containers, green, living plants, for no functional reason Duro could identify. A small folding table held 2 sealed cups of something hot. Petra was standing at the far end of the corridor. She was shorter than his shoulder. She smiled. "Welcome aboard," she said. Her pronunciation of the Breth name was almost correct. "The cups are safe. I checked your atmospheric tolerance before I came out." Rael was staring at the plants. Duro asked her why she had come out to meet them. She said someone had to, and waiting inside had seemed rude. He told her that every species that had ever faced a Breth warship in open space had either run or prepared to fight. She thought about this for a moment and said that both options sounded exhausting. He did not have a response to that. Later, back aboard his ship, alone in his command room, Duro began composing his report to the Breth Council. He wrote it formally, the way he wrote every report. He deleted 7 different phrasings of what he had observed. He could not make the data fit any standard classification. What he finally sent was this: first contact established with unknown species. Designation, human. Physical capability, negligible. Behavioral profile, does not conform to any known pattern. Recommend further observation. Current assessment, humans are either the bravest species we have ever encountered or the most broken. I cannot yet tell which. He stared at that last line for a long time. Then he transmitted it. Strongest Deathworld species met humans. Everything changed forever. There was a smell inside the human outpost that Duro could not classify. It came from somewhere near the back of the common area, warm and layered, something being cooked with ingredients he did not recognize. He cataloged it the way he cataloged everything: unknown variable, low threat probability, file and move on. But the smell stayed with him as Petra led them through the station interior, past crew photos mounted on the wall in mismatched frames, past a corner with 3 different chairs that did not match each other, past a storage cabinet someone had painted with a small yellow shape that served no tactical purpose at all. Breth spaces did not look like this. Breth spaces looked like the inside of a weapons cabinet, organized, cold, everything in its correct position. This place looked like people had lived in it long enough to stop thinking about what it was supposed to look like. Duro cataloged all of it as weakness. Rael just looked. The conference room was small. There was a table, several chairs, a screen on one wall. Petra sat across from Duro and offered water, which Rael accepted before Duro could signal him not to. Then the door opened, and a woman walked in 15 minutes after the meeting was supposed to start, limping slightly on her left side, carrying a cup of something in one hand, and wearing the expression of someone who had already decided the day was going to be fine. She dropped into the nearest chair and looked at Duro the way someone looks at a neighbor they see most mornings. Duro ran his automatic scan. Old injuries on the left leg, several healed fractures along the collarbone, a small implant near the jaw that read as a communication device. She was physically less capable than Petra. Her face was crossed with old scars that she made no effort to hide or explain. She poured herself more of her drink and said, "You look like you expected someone taller." He had no response to that. Her name was Osa. She was the captain of the Outpost and, apparently, the person who made the decisions here. She pulled out a data pad and said, "All right, let's talk about the neutral zone boundary, because I think we have slightly different ideas about where it is." Rail disappeared sometime in the first 20 minutes of the meeting. Duro let him go. The young soldier had been watching the corridors since they arrived, curious in the way that was quietly dangerous in a Vreth soldier. The kind of curiosity that led to questions, and questions led to doubt, and doubt was a structural problem. What Rail found in the corridor was a child. It was 8 years old, approximately, by the human developmental charts Duro had reviewed. It came around a corner and stopped and looked up at Rail with the kind of direct attention that most species reserved for very large threats or very interesting things. It showed no fear. It tilted its head and asked, with complete sincerity, what his teeth were for. Rail had been trained since the age of 7 to project lethal authority. He had faced armed soldiers, hostile environments, and the full weight of Vreth military expectation. He stood in a quiet corridor of a human outpost and could not think of a single thing to say. Back in the conference room, Duro had moved into the second phase of the standard Vreth dominance sequence. It was subtle, a widening of stance, a particular angle of jaw, a controlled slowing of blink rate. Every species in the known galaxy had some response to it. Most went still. Some dropped their eyes. One species had actually left the room. Petra kept reading her data pad. Osa was mid-sentence about corridor access when she stopped. She looked at Duro. Then she asked, very simply and very directly, whether he was trying to intimidate them. He confirmed that yes, he was. Osa laughed. It was not a polite laugh or a nervous laugh. It was the kind of laugh that has no performance in it at all, the kind that brings tears to the corners of the eyes and requires a moment to recover from. She set down her cup. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She laughed until the sound of it filled the small room. Duro sat very still. He did not know what was happening. When Osa stopped, she wiped her eyes, picked up her data pad and said, "Okay, where were we? Right, corridor access." She continued as if nothing had occurred. The rest of the meeting was, by any measure, functional. Osa negotiated plainly. She did not yield on anything she had decided not to yield on, but she listened without interrupting, and when Duro made a point she disagreed with, she said so and explained why. It was the most straightforward negotiation Duro had ever been part of. Partway through, he realized he had stopped calculating exit routes. Later on the shuttle back, Rail was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The child asked me if I was dangerous." Duro said nothing. "I told it the truth," Rail said. "I said yes." He paused. "It said good. It needed someone dangerous to help move a heavy storage container." Duro looked out at the stars. He did not laugh. He had never laughed, not once in 40 years of service. But something moved in the back of his mind, small and strange, like a door had been opened in a room he had not known was there. That night, trying to compose his second report to the council, he sat for a long time with a blank screen. The council wanted categories: threat level, resource potential, expansion obstacle. He could not make any of those words mean anything useful here. He thought about Osa's laugh. He thought about chosen family, a concept Petra had explained when he asked why non-related crew members would defend each other. She had said they simply chose to. He had no Vreth word for something like that. The closest word meant debt. He thought about a child asking a soldier about his teeth. He stared at the empty screen and thought, these creatures have no right to be unafraid of us. They have no armor, no venom, no natural advantage of any kind. They should be afraid. He could not explain why they were not. He filed the report incomplete and did not sleep. Strongest Deathworld species met humans. Everything changed forever. 3 scale ships came out of transit without warning and opened fire on the outpost's outer hull. The attack was desperate. Anyone with combat experience could see it. The shots were hard but scattered, the targeting inconsistent, the approach angle all wrong for a force that intended to win. On the warship's bridge, Duro watched his crew move to combat positions in the time it took to draw a breath. They were fast and cold, and already running kill trajectories before Duro had given a single order. That was how Breth trained. You did not wait to be told. You assessed and you acted, and you did not stop until the threat was gone. His weapons officer looked at him. The targeting locks were ready. Then Petra's voice came over the channel. 2 words, please wait. The weapons officer's hand stayed where it was, not because of the words, because Duro had not given the order, and the slight pause in his response was something his crew registered without comment. They waited, because he waited. He watched the Outpost response on the sensors. The humans did not fire back. They deployed a focused pulse, something electromagnetic, targeted precisely enough to shut down the Skell drive systems without tearing the hulls open. Then a docking tug came out, slow and deliberate, and began pulling the lead Skell vessel toward the Outpost's secondary bay. They were pulling in the people who had just shot at them. Duro watched this and said nothing. Rail stood beside him and said nothing. There was no Breth framework that produced this outcome. Threat appears, threat is neutralized, that was the sequence. What the humans were doing was not neutralization. It was something else. He did not have a word for it. The Skell were brought into the Outpost's secondary bay under light restraint. When Duro and Rail boarded 20 minutes later, the 7 Skell were sitting against the far wall of a storage bay that smelled of metal and recycled air. They were thin. Duro had seen Skell before. The species had a hard outer carapace that was usually a deep brown with a faint shine. These ones were dull, cracked in places, the kind of dull and cracked that came from long-term malnutrition. A human crew member was setting food in front of them, hot food from the kitchen, before anyone had asked a single question. Rail was standing near the entrance. He was watching a Skell soldier, one with a long crack running down the left side of its carapace, eat with hands that shook. Duro found Petra after. He asked her why the food before the questions. It was not a hostile question. He genuinely wanted to understand the logic. She said, because they couldn't think clearly while they were hungry. He said, they attacked you. She said, yes, hungry people do desperate things. He turned this over in his mind. The Breth had a word for enemies. They had a word for threats. They had no word for hungry people doing desperate things, because in Breth thinking, those were the same category and the response was identical. The questions came after the food. Osa sat across from the Skell leader, a creature that had fired weapons at her station less than an hour ago, and asked why they attacked. Her tone was the same as when she asked Duro about neutral zone boundaries, direct, without judgment, actually waiting for the answer. The story came out slowly. The Skell homeworld had been under blockade for 19 months. A large expansionist empire had locked down their supply lines over a territorial dispute the Skell had not started and could not resolve. 19 months of watching their people run out of things. The raid had not been a military strategy. It had been the end of a very long, very quiet desperation. Osa listened to all of it. When it was done, she turned to her logistics officer and said, "Get me the supply chain map for this sector. I want to know what we can reroute and when." She did not say she was sorry for their situation. She did not make a speech about compassion. She just started making calls, right there, practical and immediate, as if the obvious next step was so obvious it did not require comment. Duro stood at the edge of the room and felt something he had never felt before in 40 years of military service. The Breth had encountered the Skell before. 3 encounters, 3 destructions. Standard protocol, unknown vessel in Breth expansion space, hostile posture, resolve, and continue. He remembered writing the reports, clean language, accurate numbers. He had never once written the word hungry in any of those reports because it had never occurred to him to ask. He stood there and thought about all three of those ships, all those dull, cracked carapaces, all those shaking hands. He walked out to the corridor before his face could do something he would not be able to explain. Rail found him there. They stood in the quiet for a while. Then Rail asked, in a voice that was careful and even, "Do you think we have been wrong about what strength means?" Duro did not answer. He changed the subject. He said there was a council message waiting. Rail nodded and did not push. He had the patience of someone who already knew the answer and was giving the other person time to arrive. The council message was formal and cold. It said, "Cease non-essential interaction, classify humanity as threat or resource, prepare an extraction timeline." It used the correct Breth administrative language. It assumed, the way the council always assumed, that there were only two possible outcomes. Duro sat down to write the reply. He typed the standard acknowledgement first, respectful, correct, by the book. Then he deleted it. What he sent instead was one sentence: "Neither classification fits. I require more time." He held the transmit key for a moment. Then he pressed it. Outside the viewport, the Outpost's repair crew was already working on the hull damage from the attack, moving in their suits along the outer wall with their tools, methodical and unhurried, patching over the places that had been broken. When they were done, you would not be able to tell anything had happened. Duro watched them work for a long time. Strongest Deathworld species met humans. Everything changed forever. The recall order arrived with Duro's commission number and seal at the top, which meant it was not a request. He was sitting in the Outpost shared dining area when it came through on his personal device. There was a cup of something Petra had made him try the previous cycle sitting untouched in front of him. He read the order twice. Then he set the device face down on the table. For a Breth soldier, setting a direct command face down on a table was not a neutral act. It was the closest thing to refusal that a Breth military officer had ever done publicly. He knew this. He did it anyway and sat with it for a while. Petra came in later and saw his face. She did not say anything about the expression. She sat across from him and asked simply, "Are you going?" Not should he go, not what would he do, just are you going? He sat with that question for a long time too. That night, Duro and Osa ended up in the common room after the rest of the outpost had gone quiet. Osa had a habit of staying up late with a cup of something, doing nothing in particular, and Duro had a habit of walking corridors when he could not settle. It was not planned. She just looked up when he came in and moved her feet off the second chair without being asked. She noticed the symbol on his armor, an old campaign marking, worn smooth with years, and asked about it. He told her. And then, without meaning to, he kept talking. He told her about the first campaign he had been part of, a species called the Vel, small and communal, who had settled on the wrong edge of Breth expansion space. He described the campaign the way he had been trained to describe it: clean language, accurate numbers, no unnecessary weight. He told her how many engagements there were, and how long it had taken, and how efficiently everything had been resolved. Petra came in while he was talking. She heard what he was saying. She sat down without a word and stayed. When he finished, neither of them filled the silence immediately. Then Petra asked very quietly, "Do you miss any of them?" He did not answer. He had his answer ready. The Breth did not form attachments to conquered species. It was not a failure or a suppression. It simply did not occur to them, the way certain smells do not register to certain animals. He had the correct answer sitting in his mouth, and he did not say it, because something in the question had gotten underneath it. He sat in the silence, and Petra did not push him to fill it, and the not pushing was its own kind of weight. The next day, Rail was in the recreation room with the human child. Duro walked past the open door and stopped. The child was teaching Rail a strategy game played with colored tiles on a small grid. Rail kept losing. This was apparent from the pile of tiles accumulating on the child's side. What was less apparent, but visible if you looked, was that Rail was not frustrated. He was concentrating, and every time he lost, the child laughed and immediately started setting up the pieces again. Then the game changed. Rail crouched down to the child's level and began showing her something with his hands, how to feel air pressure shift, how to notice where something had moved by the trace it left behind. The child went very still and very focused in the way children do when they find something that matches the shape of their mind exactly. She was good at it immediately. Duro walked on. He did not examine what he felt watching that. Later, Osa showed him a human history summary. She did not soften it or select from it. She handed him a device and said, "Read this, all of it." He read it over several hours. Wars that lasted generations. Technologies used first for killing and only later for anything else. Entire peoples erased. Disasters caused by greed or fear or simply the failure to think far enough ahead. He had expected a species with clean hands. He had been building, without meaning to, a quiet assumption that humanity's kindness was evidence of a peaceful history. It was not. He asked how it was possible, how a species with that history had become what he was looking at. Petra said the two things were not separate. The same capacity that had let humans cause all of that damage was the same capacity that let them care so fiercely now. Cruelty and compassion did not come from different places in the human animal. They came from the same place. The difference was the choice made with it. She said they had learned, badly, slowly, with a great deal of failure, but they had learned. The Breth had never framed their history as something to learn from. History was a record. It confirmed that the Breth were strong and others were not. That was what it was for. He did not say this, but he thought it, and the thinking of it felt different than it had 3 weeks ago. The council speaker's direct transmission came that evening. The speaker was calm, measured, entirely certain of himself. The way people are certain when their entire world has confirmed them every single day for their entire lives. He gave Duro 30 cycles to provide a full military assessment of human capability and return to Breth Prime. Failure to comply would result in a formal compromised agent classification. The transmission ended. Duro sat in the dark of the communication room afterward. He thought about what the council would do with a military assessment of humanity. They wanted either a weapon or a conquest target. They could not imagine a third option because their entire architecture of thought did not include one. That night he asked Petra the question that had been sitting in him since the conversation about the Vel. How do you live with what your species has done? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We don't look away from it. That's the only answer I have." He looked at her for a long time after that. Then he went and started writing the military assessment the council had demanded. He had all the data: weapon yields, fleet counts, response times. He wrote it accurately. And when he reached the end, he opened a second file and began writing something else, not for the council, not a report, something with no category. Just what he had seen, just what it meant. He did not know what he would do with it. He wrote anyway. Strongest Deathworld species met humans. Everything changed forever. Nobody planned for the Outpost to become what it became. Word moved the way word moves in the outer sectors. Not through official channels, but through the ones that mattered, the informal routes, the conversations between crew members at fuel depots and repair stations. The Skell who had left told other Skell. Other Skell told the Tev, who were nervous about everything but came anyway, 2 delegates in a small vessel that docked very carefully. Then 2 Marin traders who said they had heard there was a place that did not ask for papers. Then a Drell researcher who came for a week and simply never left. The corridors of the Outpost now held 6 species. Duro walked through them every day and cataloged the situation in terms he had stopped quite believing. He told himself it was chaos. It drove him to distraction. He noticed, at some point, that the distraction had a different quality than it used to, less like threat assessment, and more like something he did not have a Breth word for. The Skell sent a diplomat. Not a raider, not a desperate crew, an actual diplomat newly appointed, carrying a formal message of thanks from the Provisional Council. He arrived in a clean vessel with proper identification and a carefully written introduction. Osa received him in the common room the same way she received everyone, like an acquaintance she was glad to see, without ceremony or performance. Duro was standing across the room when the Skell diplomat looked at him. The diplomat had to know what a Breth was. Everyone in the outer sectors knew. He stood in the doorway with the weight of that knowledge visible in the way he held himself, and then he gave a slow, formal bow. The old kind. The kind that meant, I see you, and I am still standing here. Duro did not know what to do with that either. He was running out of frameworks. The council speaker's fleet arrived without warning and filled the external sensors within 90 seconds. 7 warships, full combat configuration. Duro watched the sensors update and knew precisely what each ship was carrying, knew what the formation meant, knew how long it would take them to reach optimal weapons range if the order was given. The Outpost's response was to note it on the sensors, relay the information to the relevant staff, and continue what they were doing. Nobody ran. The speaker hailed the station and requested Duro directly. Duro took the transmission in the communications room. The speaker was exactly as he always was, composed, precise, genuinely believing everything he said. He gave Duro until the next cycle to board a shuttle and return to the fleet. He used the word compromise 3 times. He meant it as a diagnosis. From across the room, Rail watched Duro's face during the transmission. He watched it the way someone watches a person standing at a ledge, not interfering, just present, just there. The transmission ended. Rail submitted his asylum request 20 minutes later. He did it quietly in writing through Petra's console, while the speaker's fleet was still on the external feed. He did not make a speech about it. He typed it and submitted it and sat down. Petra read it. Her reply came back in 4 words, granted, welcome, stay safe. Rail read those 4 words and then walked to the recreation room and sat down with the human child and lost 3 games of tiles in a row and did not think about what he had left behind, or tried not to, and mostly succeeded. That night Duro walked the corridors for a long time. He passed the berth where the Skell diplomat was staying and heard quiet voices. The diplomat and a human crew member discussing navigation charts, comparing sector maps, the conversation unhurried and technical and completely ordinary. He passed the recreation room. 2 Marin traders were asleep in the chairs. A human crew member had left a blanket folded over the shorter one. He passed Osa's office. She was still awake, visible through the small window in the door, arguing cheerfully with someone on a long-range channel about supply routing, her feet up on the desk, her scarred face relaxed and unbothered. He stood at the viewport at the far end of the corridor and looked at the council fleet sitting in the dark. He thought about the Vel. He thought about the 3 encounters with the Skell and what those ships might have been carrying. He thought about every species the Breth had pressed against a wall and what they had asked for at the end, and how none of them had asked for mercy. They had just asked for someone to remember them, to know they had been there, to mark the fact of them in some record somewhere. Nobody had, not once. The certainty settled into him quietly, the way things settle when they have been building for a long time and finally find the floor. He opened the channel to the council speaker. He resigned his commission using the correct Breth ceremonial language, formal, proper, the old register, the words used for the dissolution of a military oath. The speaker's response was silence and then the threat of war. Duro said, "That is your choice to make. I have made mine." He closed the channel. Osa was already at the main communications panel when he came into the room. She had been listening. She looked at him once, not with pity, not with triumph, just acknowledgement, one person seeing another, and then she opened a channel to the speaker's flagship. She introduced herself, her name, her rank, her planet of origin. Then she said, "All right then, but I should mention we've been making friends out here for a while now." The channel was quiet for a long moment. In the common room behind her, the Skell diplomat had gone very still. The Tev delegates were holding each other's hands. The Marin traders were awake now, leaning in from the doorway. The night cycle continued. The fleet did not fire. Duro found a chair in the common room and sat in it. His chest plate was off. He had taken it off somewhere in the long walk and had not noticed until now. His sidearm was still there, habit too old to break. Petra brought him the hot drink again. He took it and did not pretend it wasn't there, and did not thank her, and she did not require either. He had no word in his language for what this room was. He thought he might need to borrow one. Strongest Deathworld species met humans. Everything changed forever. The Council fleet began its approach in the hour before the Outpost's morning cycle. The sensors lit up with targeting locks, 7 warships, all weapons active, the formation tight and professional. On the bridge, every species aboard the Outpost had a different physical response to what was happening. The Tev delegates pressed close together and went very still. The Skell diplomat stood with his hands flat at his sides, which was the Skell way of being afraid without showing it. 2 human crew members who had been playing a card game when the alert came in set their cards down carefully, face down, as if they might come back to them. Then the sensor feed updated. 17 additional ships came out of transit, then 30, then more from different points around the neutral zone, emerging at intervals like something that had been waiting patient for the moment to arrive. Not warships, a Skell patrol craft, a Tev diplomatic cruiser, small and formal, Marin freighters, 3 vessels from a species that had no common name yet in any registry, flying with transponders that broadcast coordinates instead of identities. None of them were armed for war. All of them were present. Duro watched the Council fleet try to fit what it was seeing into a military threat model. He knew the thinking. He had done that thinking his whole life. You counted weapons. You calculated tonnage. You assessed kill probability. None of those calculations worked here because this was not an armada. It was something harder to classify, and therefore something that required, before the order to fire, a moment of assessment. He was going to use that moment. He opened a channel to every ship in the Breth fleet simultaneously, not just the flagship, every vessel, and he spoke in the formal register used for truth witness in old Breth ceremony. Every Breth soldier from childhood learned what that register meant. It meant, this is not politics, this is real. He did not tell them to disobey. He told them what he had seen. He described Petra walking into open space without armor, without weapons, carrying food. He described Osa laughing until tears ran down her face, not out of mockery but because something had genuinely surprised her, and she had not known how to hold it except to let it out. He described the Skell soldiers with shaking hands, and the humans who fed them before asking a single question. He described Rael, their own, a Breth soldier born and trained the same way they had been born and trained, sitting on the floor of a recreation room losing a game to a human child and not leaving. He said, I am not asking you to be something different than you are. I am asking you to look at what is actually in front of you, because I looked and I cannot unknow what I saw. He closed the channel. Inside one of the fleet warships, a young weapons officer sat with a targeting lock active under his hand. He had never personally fired on a living target. He sat very still after Duro's voice stopped. At the front of the bridge, his captain had not spoken since the transmission began. The captain was still not speaking. The targeting lock stayed where it was, and the silence in the room was a kind of answer. The council speaker's voice came over the fleet channel. The order to fire was clear, formal, correct in every procedural way. The silence that answered it was not defiance. It was something quieter, something that had never happened before in 300 years of Vreth military history. The speaker issued the order a second time, then a third. On the speaker's own flagship, his second officer called a formal command review. The mechanism existed in the old Vreth legal code. No one alive had ever used it. She called it, and the room voted, and the speaker's face in the moment he understood what was happening was the face of a man whose entire world had always confirmed him, encountering the first morning it would not. He was not harmed. He was removed. It was quieter than any battle Duro had ever witnessed, and it cost more. The ceasefire came through on the Outpost sensors as a cessation of targeting locks. The common room registered the moment differently for every species in it. The Skell diplomat went very still and then sat down slowly. Rail was standing against the wall with his arms folded, and his face was the face of someone who would not cry here in front of others, but was storing it carefully for later. Osa said, "Well, now comes the paperwork." It was not funny, and it was also, in the specific way she said it, very funny. The negotiations began 3 days later in the Outpost's conference room. It was too small. There were too many translators. Twice the table was not big enough for the documents being spread on it. Someone's drink got knocked over in the first 10 minutes. The Vreth delegation, new faces, none of them comfortable, all of them trying, disagreed with almost everything on principle for the first 2 hours before one of them said something that was actually a question rather than a position, and the room shifted slightly. Duro sat through all of it. He contributed when he could. He watched humans hold long pauses without filling them, which was something most species struggled with, and Petra had apparently taught everyone to do. He watched the Skell diplomat translate a Vreth legal concept into something the Marin traders could understand, and the Marin traders respond with a framework the Tev delegation accepted immediately. He watched the work being done, slow and frustrating and unglamorous, and understood that this kind of work was harder than anything he had ever done with a weapon, and that this was the correct order of things. 1 year later, Duro stood on Vreth Prime for the first time as a civilian. The sky was deep red, as it always was. The gravity pressed down with the comfortable weight he had grown up under and then spent decades missing without knowing he was missing it. The city around them was built for beings who needed no softness, everything high and angular, everything functional. He had brought Petra. The children in the market district stopped to stare at her. Stories had traveled. Everyone on Vreth Prime had heard something about humans by now, but hearing and seeing were different, and she was small and unarmored and walking through their city as if she found it genuinely interesting, which she did. One child, young enough that the war was already a story told by parents rather than a memory, walked directly up to her and stared with the same focused intensity that a human child had once turned on Rail's teeth. Petra crouched down and smiled at the child. Duro stood beside her and did not move for a long moment. He thought the galaxy feared the Vreth because they were powerful. They will remember us because she was not afraid, and because she made us wonder why. The strongest Deathworld species in the galaxy met humanity, and for the first time in 300 years of conquest, they chose to stop.